Are you listening?
Hey, welcome back to the Nerf Report. My name is Brian Chappelle. Thank you so much for joining us. A lot has happened in this last week. MarketWatch announced that the cloud gaming market will hit $5 billion by 2025. Cuphead finally came to the PlayStation 4. New polls show that 84% of gamers are planning on buying a PlayStation 5 instead of an Xbox Series X. And Google Stadia finally opened up the floodgates to allow players to game using their 4G, 5G mobile networks. And each one of these stories could easily justify their own shows. But for this week's episode, I want to talk to you about E3. What once was the most impactful and most anticipated event of the year for gamers could be in trouble when it comes to justifying their own existence. And yes, I understand that for years, people have been saying that E3 is dying. Hell, following last year's E3, we made a rap diss track video called The Death of E3 that to this date is what I consider as one of the best pieces of content that we've ever made. But the fact is, despite all of the predictions of E3's impending doom, the convention is facing a massive uphill battle as it contemplates returning in 2021. Think about it. In 2019, PlayStation and EA, two of the industry's largest companies, announced that they would no longer be attending E3. And in 2020, the convention was forced to cancel due to the American COVID-19 pandemic, which the COVID-19 pandemic will eventually come to an end. So for E3, it's not really that big of an issue. But when you have major exhibitors beginning to lose their faith in your convention, that's a massive problem. In fact, in 2020, the video game industry as a whole drove probably the biggest nail into E3's coffin. Because with the lack of major conventions to announce new games, hardware, or services, platforms had to work internally to replace E3. PlayStation had State of Plays, Nintendo had Directs, Google Stadia has Connects, and Xbox has their own show called Inside Xbox. And we're just talking about major gaming platforms. Developers have begun to hold their own digital events as well, like the Ubisoft Forward, EA Play, Devolver Direct, Marvel Avengers War Table, Cyberpunk Night City Wire, and Media Molecule's Dreamscom. And quite frankly, we can even expand past that. You had things like Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest, the Guerrilla Collective, the Upload VR Showcase, the Day of the Dev, and IGN's Summer of Gaming. By E3 not deciding to hold a convention this year, not only did they lose the focus of their audience, but they gave birth to 20 competitors that they will now have to compete with for exclusive announcements and the attention of the press. Now, the obvious complaint here is that without E3, all of these digital events can kind of become pretty overwhelming. For example, E3 was 1 week of gaming news and announcements, whereas we have had at least one of these digital events every week since March of 2020. Which, if you're like me and have lost track of all time and its meaning during COVID, March used to be the third month of the year. It was such a simpler time, a time where you could go to the movies, have birthday parties with friends, and even shake hands with strangers. Before the dark times. And let's be clear, this isn't just some conspiracy theory dooming E3. Probably one of the most damning statistics was found by GameIndustry.biz this week, where they discovered games that were announced without E3 in 2020 actually had a stronger 72 hours of press coverage than games that were announced at E3 in 2019, with their report specifically pointing out the announcement of Assassin's Creed Valhalla and how it saw an increase of 42% in coverage than the 2019 announcement of Elden Ring. Now, obviously there is a lot to unpack there. One, Elden Ring is a new franchise, whereas Assassin's Creed has a massive following. And two, there are definitely more people who are at home right now that have way more time on their hands. I mean, even with the Nerf report, we've seen an increase in views by 65% over 2019. And as much as I would like to take credit for it being due to format changes, better topics, or just my genuinely good looks, I can actually pinpoint the exact moment of views increasing and correlate that to the very first day of the US quarantine. But that being said, the argument of having more free time can only go so far, because at some point you have to discuss the audience's attention. In fact, the team at SuperData dropped a report this week that showed not only did the 2020 live streams have an increase in views, but they also saw an increase in watch time, with Ubisoft's 2019 E3 press conference garnering 750,000 minutes of watch time, whereas the 2020 Ubisoft Forward event generated over 1 million minutes of watch time. However, SuperData did also confirm that having more press conferences definitely is not the answer here, as the PC gaming show definitely suffered from gamers' fatigue. As in 2019, it generated 141,000 minutes of watch time, and in 2020, it hit 68,000 minutes of watch time. And as a convention goer, I totally get it. You might be thinking, you can't replace a convention with a video press conference, because one of the major reasons for attending a convention is being able to see new technology and play video games firsthand. But even with that, both Xbox and the Summer Game Fest partnered up to create the Summer Game Fest demo event, which brought over 60 brand new game demos to Xbox over the course of 1 week. And I guess the point that I'm trying to get to with all of this is E3 and other large gaming conventions are really going to have to justify their existence moving forward. Like, not only have the major platforms and publishers replaced the necessity for attending a convention, but really, the cost is no longer justified. For example, story time. 3 years ago, when I was starting the Nerf report, I looked into buying a booth at E3. And the cost of a 6x10 square foot booth was going to be around $30,000 just for the space. So that doesn't include travel, it doesn't include hotel, food, or the actual booth setup. So realistically, I was probably looking at about like $50,000. Think about companies like PlayStation, who have booths that are much larger than a simple 6x10 space. Companies who have 20 to 30 employees in attendance. The cost of E3 for larger companies could easily be $300,000 to $600,000. And that doesn't even begin to include the cost of the massive E3 press conferences that are held in arenas and theaters. The cost of E3 for larger companies could easily be upwards to $1 million. Whereas with the State of Play or a Direct, the cost to produce that is way less. You might have a team of 6 to 10 people working on that, and that's it. And quite frankly, saying 10 people is probably an overestimate. I mean, as just my experience of producing this show for the last 3 years all by myself, simpler events like the Nintendo Direct or Stadia Connects, you probably could get away with 1 or 2 people doing the entire job. And I guess how I want to wrap this all up is E3 is in serious trouble. They've lost their audience, publishers and platforms have made demos more accessible than ever, and in today's world where every bearded white guy has a gaming news channel, you really don't need events like E3 to spread news anymore. PlayStation could drop a tweet tomorrow with the cost of the PlayStation 5, and channels like mine would make sure that that information went viral. However, like most weeks, that's just my opinion, and only time will tell whether or not E3 is able to come back in 2021 and justify their existence. I do know one thing though. If E3 does come back, our next diss track is going to be lit. Finally, let's talk Sword and Shield. More specifically, how is this game even real? New Pokemon, the size of skyscrapers, it looks like you drew them with some crayon and paper, and please, that's not a diss. I just can't believe I've waited 5 years for this. And Xbox, let's talk Infinite. How you gonna drop a trailer with no action in it? Ubisoft, I hear you laughing. But you ripped off Zelda and actually seemed kinda proud of it. Bethesda, suddenly you've got the answers. Here's a new game for you. It's called Cancel. Hell, after this year's show, we should just cancel all their asses. Xbox, Nintendo, PlayStation, Ubisoft, you've all been canceled. Hey, thanks again for checking out our channel. Are you like the thousands of people in the comment section down below wondering why does this channel have so little subscribers? Well, you can fix that today by subscribing to the channel, liking the video, commenting, and sharing it with your friends, which I know sounds like a lot, but I feel like our channel is worth it.